Bitcoin actually embodies and codifies the American ideals better than any technology in the world. And I'll give you kind of two examples. The first is when I talked about free speech and the ability to kind of have the protection of the US Constitution. In the financial system today, you do not have free speech, right? There are many court cases that prove that software is free speech and all this stuff. And again, there is reasons why people will argue you shouldn't have the free speech. You shouldn't be able to do what you want with your money, whatever. But I think that Bitcoin ultimately says, although you may be sympathetic to a government or not, anyone in the world is able to send economic value to anyone else without asking permission of a third party. Now, in the United States, actually, I would argue we've been pretty damn good about protecting people's free speech and allowing them to conduct economic transactions as long as we didn't deem them to be financing terrorists or money laundering or kind of breaking the rules, right? For the most part, you or I can go to the ATM, we can get money out, we can go and buy stuff, we can swipe our credit card, we can send money to people around the world, and like we kind of go about our day. Other people around the world, in fact, hundreds of millions, if not billions of people can't do that. And sometimes that's because their governments are kind of oppressive. Sometimes that's because there are companies that are doing things that, either take value from them, stop them, whatever. Or it could actually be because their currency is inflating so quickly. If you look at somewhere like a Turkey, a Zimbabwe, a Venezuela, whatever, where literally the prices are changing in the store on an hour-to-hour basis, right? And so it just makes it nearly impossible to be able to express your economic view if literally the prices change on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's like one piece of this Bitcoin story is the ability to take the ideal of free speech and codify it in a piece of technology and then hand it to anyone in the world with an internet connection, right? The accessibility of this is a kind of a key component. The second thing is this idea of private property rights. So if I was to ask you, what property do you own? You would tell me a list of all the assets that you kind of have on what would be the equivalent of your like personal balance sheet. You say, hey, I maybe have a house, I've got some stocks, I've got some cash, I've got, whatever other kind of assets you own. But if you actually go and you break that down, the odds of you being able to defend your personal property is very, very low. For example, if a bank was to say to you, we're not going to give you your dollars back, you, yes, do have a legal path. You can go to court, you can go and try to fight it and do all this stuff. But what we've seen is in many countries around the world, Cyprus back in the 2012, 2013 timeframe is kind of the quintessential example that Bitcoiners point to. They basically just said, look, we're just going to tax this because we need it. And they were able to take that currency, that hard-earned economic value from citizens without any kind of real rhyme or reason or legal precedent. And so if you then were to go and say, well, let me look at my house, for example, there are people who lose their homes every single day. And sometimes that is because of actions of their own. Sometimes that is actions of other organizations. And sometimes there's things like eminent domain where literally pieces of their personal property are then confiscated by the government. And I don't think that this is so much a anti-government view, which again, there are definitely people in every community, right? There's literally people on both sides of the aisle who think the government is bad or whatever. But I do think that this is very much an individual rights story. And if there's one thing that we've seen over time in this digital era, it's that individual rights are being decreased rather than increased. And sometimes there is a strong argument for why that's happening, kind of the greater good and kind of all of those different points. But when it comes to your ability to have freedom of speech and express your views without being inhibited by governments, organizations, or other individuals, and then also the ability to own and defend your own personal property, I would argue that in the digital realm, Bitcoin is the only asset where you actually have ownership of an asset that is not subject to other organizations, governments, or other individuals who can then come in and unilaterally confiscate it without your kind of agreement.